The sign above the bay door had been repainted twice in 7 years, and it showed. The letters, Cole, Automotive Repair, bled slightly at the edges where the brush had trembled, and the white paint beneath had yellowed into the color of old teeth. A rusted wind chime, made from old spark plugs, hung beside the door frame, clicking softly in the dry July air. Nobody had hung it there for decoration. Lily had made it in kindergarten, and Ethan Cole had refused to take it down. The garage sat on the far west side of Harlan's Creek, a small Ohio town that existed mostly because of the interstate interchange 3 miles north. There were 2 traffic lights in town, 1 diner, 1 post office, and approximately nobody who drove a Lamborghini. The nearest authorized supercar dealer was 60 miles east in Columbus, which was also where the nearest sushi restaurant was, and the nearest parking garage, with a clearance under 5 feet, that could theoretically damage a car worth more than a house. This was, Ethan had concluded over the years, the single greatest advantage of living in Harlan's Creek. Nobody brought him problems designed by committee for an owner with no mechanical empathy. They brought him trucks and sedans and occasionally a weekend enthusiast's project car. And they expected work done well at a price that reflected reality. Inside Bay 1, the concrete floor was swept clean. The tool chests were organized by category, not alphabetically, not by size, but by the internal logic of a man who had worked the same space for so long that his hands could find a 10mm socket in total darkness. Oil rags were folded. Coolant bottles stood upright. A small whiteboard on the near wall showed the week's job list in block letters: 97F, 150 timing belt, Nakamura Civic brake pads, Henderson Silverado diff fluid, hold Porsche consultation Tuesday. The hold notation was Ethan's way of flagging a job he hadn't decided to take. He was underneath a lifted Ford pickup when he heard Lily's sneakers on the concrete, that particular shuffle-drag shuffle that meant she was carrying something heavy and important. "Bah," she said. This was her word for him. She had decided at age 3 that Dad was insufficient, and she had never revisited the decision. He was torquing a bolt that had not moved in 11 years and required his full moral attention. "There's a car coming down the road," she said. "A yellow one. Yellow cars come down roads all the time, Lily. Not like this one." A pause. He could hear her set something down on the workbench, the sketch pad, probably. "Bah. Is a car supposed to make noise when it breathes?" Ethan stopped turning the wrench. He lay still for a moment beneath the truck, listening to whatever was happening outside the open bay door. And yes, there it was. A low, rolling, mechanical respiration. Not the sound of an engine under load. The sound of an engine talking to itself. He rolled out from under the truck. She was right. It was a yellow one. The Lamborghini Aventador SVJ rolled into his gravel lot at what appeared to be the minimum speed physically possible for a vehicle of its temperament. The color was not the cheerful yellow of a school bus or a sunflower. It was the aggressive, almost hostile yellow of a hornet. The carbon fiber splitter at the front cleared the gravel by perhaps 1.5 inches, and the car moved with the cautious arrogance of something that knew it was not built for places like this. Ethan wiped his hands on the shop rag tucked through his belt loop and watched it park. "It sounds different," Lily said, appearing at his elbow. She was 6, with her mother's dark eyes and Ethan's habit of absolute stillness when observing something. She held a green crayon in her left hand. "Like it's nervous." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He was listening to the idle. It was erratic in a very specific way, not the randomness of a misfiring cylinder, but the particular irregularity of an electrical system communicating something to an ECU that wasn't sure how to respond. He had heard this sound before. He had heard it in a factory in Stuttgart 9 years ago, on a production floor that smelled of composite resin and controlled stress. "Stay on the bench," he told Lily. She climbed onto the workbench with the practiced ease of someone who had been told this particular thing 4,000 times and had long since accepted it as the price of proximity to interesting events. The Lamborghini's engine shut off. For 1 second, the lot was perfectly quiet. Then the door swung upward, the dramatic scissor articulation that the manufacturer had chosen because drama was, for vehicles of this price point, considered a feature, and a woman stepped out into the Ohio heat. Her name, Ethan would learn, was Victoria Hale. She was 34. She was the founder and CEO of a software infrastructure company called Hale Systems, which had been valued at slightly above $1 billion at its last funding round. She wore sunglasses that cost more than Ethan's truck, a cream-colored linen blazer, and the particular expression of someone who had not waited for anything in several years and intended to maintain that record. She looked at the garage. She looked at the sign. She looked at Ethan. "This is Cole Automotive?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." She removed her sunglasses and studied him with the frank, evaluative gaze of someone who assessed risk for a living. He was tall, with forearms that looked like they had been built by a decade of manual work, and a calm that she immediately identified, without quite knowing why, as something other than indifference. "My navigation died," she said. "I need a charge point and a phone signal. I have a board meeting in Dayton at—" "The car has a problem," Ethan said. She paused. "I'm sorry? Your vehicle." He nodded toward the Aventador. "The BCM is throwing an error. Body control module. It's affecting your keyless entry system, your window controls, and your door locks. If you drive it the way it is right now, there's a real chance the system resets mid-ignition cycle, and you'll lose access to the door release from inside." Victoria Hale blinked once, slowly, the way a person blinks when they have been told something by someone they have not yet decided to take seriously. "I appreciate the concern," she said, with a politeness that was not warm. "But I just had this car serviced 3 weeks ago at the authorized dealer in Columbus." "I'm sure you did. They have a team of factory-certified technicians." "I'm sure they do." The silence between them was the kind that has weight. A crow landed on the fence post at the edge of the lot and immediately reconsidered. "I can take a look in 20 minutes, Ethan said. "No charge for the inspection." Victoria looked at the garage one more time, at the yellowed sign, at the wind chime, at the 6-year-old on the workbench, who was now drawing something with her green crayon and paying attention to nothing and everything simultaneously. "That's very kind," Victoria said, in the tone of voice that means the opposite. "But I don't think that'll be necessary." She put her sunglasses back on. "Is there a cell signal out here? Or is that also something you'll offer to fix for free?" Ethan pointed east. $3 if you stand by the fence." She walked toward the fence, phone already raised. Ethan watched the Aventador for another moment. Then he turned and walked back into the bay. "Bah," Lily said from the workbench. Is the car okay?" Ethan picked up the torque wrench. He did not look at the Lamborghini. He did not need to. He had already seen everything he needed to see. The BCM fault wasn't guesswork. He had helped design the failure protocols for that exact module during his last 18 months at Kessler Automotive Systems, before everything changed, before he had taken Lily and moved back to a small town in Ohio, and opened a garage with a crooked sign and a wind chime made of spark plugs. "No," he said. "Are you going to help her?" He slid back under the Ford. "If she asks." Victoria Hale got $3 by the fence, exactly as the mechanic had promised, and she made 2 calls and sent 4 emails in 11 minutes, which was approximately the pace at which she conducted her entire life. She confirmed her attendance at the board meeting. She arranged a car service to intercept her at the next sizable town on the route. She sent a message to her assistant, instructing him to reschedule the afternoon and move the evening call with the Singapore office to Thursday. By the time she walked back to the car, she had already mentally closed the chapter labeled Breakdown in Rural Ohio and was opening the one labeled Dayton Board Meeting. She did not look at the mechanic. She did not look at the little girl on the workbench. She slid her sunglasses onto her head, reached for the door which swung upward smoothly and correctly, because the system had not yet completed its failure, and settled into the seat. The leather interior was precisely 91 degrees Fahrenheit. She did not notice this immediately. She was looking at her phone, composing one more message, and the sting of the heated leather against the backs of her thighs registered, and was dismissed in the space of a single unconscious thought. She pressed the engine start. The Aventador's V12 woke with its characteristic violence, that instantaneous, total explosion of mechanical sound that felt less like an ignition and more like an announcement. The gauges lit. The display screen came alive with the sweep of its boot sequence. The climate control activated, and cool air began to move from the vents. Victoria set her phone in the center console tray and put her hand on the steering column. Then the car died. Not gradually. Not with warning. The sound did not wind down or sputter. It simply stopped, the way a conversation stops when someone leaves the room, and in its place was a silence so absolute that it felt pressurized. The display screen went dark. Victoria looked at it. She pressed the engine start again. Nothing. She pressed it again, held it this time. The way people hold buttons when they have decided that duration will substitute for mechanism. Nothing. The button's indicator light, which should have pulsed amber, was not lit at all. She tried the door, the handle depressed. The actuator clicked. The door did not move. She tried it again, the same result, the same small hydraulic click that meant the signal had been sent and the mechanism had received it and had chosen not to comply. The window switch. Nothing. The interior light. Nothing. The display remained black. Every powered surface in the car was dead. She was sitting in a carbon fiber and aluminum sculpture in the middle of an Ohio afternoon, with the sun moving through the glass at an angle that had already raised the cabin temperature 2 degrees. Since the climate control had stopped, she picked up her phone. No signal. She was 6 feet from where she had stood to make her calls. 6 feet. And a car door made of aluminum and aerodynamic composite. And the signal was gone as completely as if she were at the bottom of a lake. Victoria Hale looked at the dark display screen for 3 full seconds. Then she looked out through the windshield at the garage bay, where a man in a shop-stained shirt was sliding out from beneath a Ford truck, slowly, unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world, as though he had been waiting for precisely this moment and had decided not to rush it. He stood up. He looked at the Lamborghini. He did not move. She knocked on the glass. The cabin temperature in a sealed automobile on a July afternoon in Ohio climbs faster than most people understand. Most people have never had reason to understand it. The relevant physics are simple and merciless. Glass transmits solar radiation inward. The interior surfaces, seat leather, dashboard composite, headliner absorb that radiation and re-emit it as infrared heat. The air, with nowhere to go, accumulates thermal energy at a rate of approximately 1 degree per minute in direct sun. The Aventador had no shade. The lot was fully exposed. The time was 2:17 p.m. The sun hit the car at an angle that turned the yellow paint into something that looked less like a color and more like a verdict. Victoria knocked again. The sound her knuckles made on the glass was muffled, less forceful than she intended, absorbed by the thickness of the laminate. The glass was already warm against her knuckles. She noticed this with the precise attention that people bring to details when they suddenly have nothing else to organize their minds around. Outside, the mechanic Ethan, whose name she had not asked, because asking his name would have required looking at him as a person rather than a local resource with variable reliability, stood with his hands hanging at his sides, watching the car. His expression was unreadable from inside the glass. She could not see if he was concerned. She could not see if he was satisfied. She could not see what he was thinking. And this was, she was discovering, a different and more particular discomfort than not being able to open the door. She tried the door handle a third time, a fourth. She leaned across the console and tried the passenger door from the inside. The result was the same. The actuator clicked, received no authorization from the BCM, and returned to its rest position. The emergency release. Every modern vehicle had one. She searched for it, with her hands along the inner door panel, beneath the armrest, in the map pocket. The Aventador's interior had been specified to the absolute minimum of utilitarian accommodation. The designers had allocated no space for a visible mechanical release lever because the car had been designed by people who believed it would never need one. There was a mechanical override, but it was concealed behind the door panel's lower trim piece, and you needed to know where to look. Ethan knew where to look. He was still standing outside. Victoria's phone showed no signal. She turned it toward the window, pressed it against the glass at the top where the seal was thinnest. and watched the signal indicator. 0 bars. 1 bar, briefly, like a hand waving from a long distance. 0 again. She was not panicking. She was applying her considerable intelligence to the problem in the way she applied her intelligence to everything systematically, urgently, without sentiment. But the cabin was now 97 degrees, and the back of her linen blazer was damp against the seat, and there was a quality to the air that she recognized, without the vocabulary to name precisely, as the beginning of scarcity. She knocked again, harder, with the flat of her palm. Outside, the little girl she was sitting on the workbench in the open bay, visible through the windshield, put down her crayon. She watched the car. She said something to the mechanic that Victoria could not hear. He looked at the girl. Then he looked at the car. Then he picked up a small red toolbox and walked toward it. Not running, walking. Every step he took was at the same pace as every other step. His face had the quality of someone performing a task they had performed before. Not indifferent, not urgent, but occupied, in the way of a person to whom an emergency is not a departure from routine but a different variety of it. Victoria pressed both palms flat against the glass and felt the heat of the window on her skin, which surprised her. And then she began to breathe in a more deliberate and conscious way than she had breathed in years. "Bah," Lily said. He was already at the front trunk, which on the Aventador occupied the space ahead of the engine where a conventional car would have its engine compartment. His hand found the emergency frunk release with the precision of muscle memory that had not been exercised in 7 years, but had not, evidently, forgotten itself. The frunk lid lifted. He set the red toolbox on the gravel and opened it. Inside Bay 1, Lily had gotten down from the workbench. She stood at the threshold of the bay door, 1 foot inside, 1 foot on the concrete apron, watching. "Is she scared?" Lily asked. "Getting there," Ethan said, not loudly. He did not look up from the frunk. "She's hitting the window." "I know. Should we help her?" He pulled a panel trim tool from the red box and worked it along the edge of the frunk's interior panel, a composite plate that covered the BCM wiring harness. "We are helping her, Lily." Lily watched him work with the same focused attention she gave to anything she wanted to draw later. His hands moved without hesitation. The trim tool found the clip points by feel. The panel released. And beneath it was a nest of bundled wiring in the colors of a complex argument. Red, black, yellow, gray, white. He studied it for 1 second, the speed of recognition, not of calculation. "She was mean to you," Lily said. "People get mean when they're scared." She wasn't scared yet when she was mean. Ethan paused for a very brief moment. Then he said, "You're right. Some people are mean before they're scared." He found the connector he was looking for and began to work a small length of auxiliary wire from his shirt pocket. "That's a different problem. We're not solving that one right now. What are you solving?" "The lock." Lily thought about this. She turned and looked at Victoria through the windshield. The woman's hair, which had been neat when she arrived, was beginning to come loose from whatever had been pinning it, in the way that very composed people's carefully managed things always begin to come loose when the circumstances stop cooperating. Her face was flushed. She had stopped hitting the glass and was now sitting very still, which was, Ethan knew, either the calm of someone gathering themselves or the beginning of heat-related distress. "Bah," Lily said. "Ma'am, when you open it, she's going to be embarrassed." He threaded the auxiliary wire through a connector bypass with the delicacy of someone performing a task that required the gap between too much pressure and not enough to be exactly 0. "Probably. That's okay," Lily said, as though she was giving him permission. "She'll be okay. She will." He looked up, briefly, through the windshield. He met Victoria's eyes through the glass. He held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. Victoria stared at the 2 fingers. She was breathing through her nose, slowly, consciously, the way she had been taught to breathe in the 3 months she had spent doing meditation before abandoning it for a more efficient anxiety management system. The cabin was now 103 degrees. Her phone showed 0 bars. The display screen remained dark. She watched the mechanic's hands moving in the open frunk. She could not see what he was doing. She could only see the top of his head and the efficient, unhurried quality of his focus, which was, she was discovering, the most infuriating possible thing to witness from inside a sealed car in July. She counted the seconds. She did not count them out loud. She counted them in the interior of her chest, where the heat had settled and was making itself at home. 40 seconds, 50. She heard a sound she could not immediately identify. Not a click, not exactly, more like a pulse, as though the car's electrical system had taken a single breath. The display screen flickered. 1 second of partial illumination, the boot sequence interrupted, redirected, asked to perform a different function than the one it had been programmed for. Then the door locks disengaged. Both of them. Front and rear. The sound was so small, 4 muted clunks, the mechanical assertion of authority returned to its proper location, that it should not have felt like anything significant. But the body knows what the mind is slow to admit. Victoria's exhale was not a breath. It was a collapse. She pulled the handle, the door swung up and open, and the air, which was still hot, still the full brutality of July in a graveled lot in Ohio, came in, and it was the best air she had ever encountered in her life. She swung her legs out, stood, and her knees did the thing that knees do when the body has been holding itself together by will alone, and suddenly no longer needs to. She sat on the door sill, hands on her thighs. Head forward. Ethan was already closing the frunk. He latched it, picked up his red toolbox, and walked around to the driver's side. He did not offer his hand. He stopped 4 feet away from her, close enough to intervene if she needed it, far enough not to crowd a person who was in the process of reassembling their dignity. He said nothing. "How long?" she said. Her voice was even. She was working on keeping it that way. "How long was I in there?" 4 minutes and 30 seconds from when the system failed. "That's not," she stopped. She had been about to say "that's not very long," but she did not say it, because she had been inside for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and it had not felt like 4 minutes and 30 seconds. It had felt like time with the ordinary structure removed from it. "You need water," Ethan said. From the bay door, Lily appeared at a run, the particular run of a small person who has been waiting at the threshold for permission, and has now received it carrying a plastic bottle of water in both hands, very seriously, as though it were a thing of ceremony. She stopped in front of Victoria and held it out. Victoria looked at her. The girl had very dark eyes and a stripe of green crayon on her left wrist. She was looking at Victoria with an expression that contained no pity and no judgment, only the complete attention of someone for whom the present moment was the only moment. Victoria took the water. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," Lily said. She stayed. She continued to look. "Your face is really red." "I know. Ba says that's because the blood goes to your skin when you're hot, so you don't cook on the inside." Victoria looked at the water bottle for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "That's correct. He says a lot of things that are correct," Lily said, with the authority of long experience. "Even when he doesn't say them out loud." She turned and walked back to the bay, retrieved her sketch pad, and climbed back onto the workbench. The other man arrived 40 minutes later. His name was Dennis Farrow, and he drove a rental sedan with a Hertz sticker on the bumper, which was how Ethan knew the rental was not a habit. Dennis was 61, with the hands of someone who had spent his career using them for precise things, and he had the particular gait of someone who had once moved through large facilities at speed and now moved through small facilities at the same speed out of loyalty to a past version of himself. He had been following a recommendation from his former colleague, a man who had mentioned over drinks at an industry conference in Cleveland 3 weeks prior that there was a mechanic outside Harlan's Creek who had once diagnosed a composite brake failure on a Pagani Zonda through audio analysis alone. Dennis had driven an hour and a half to have Ethan look at a Porsche 911 GT3 that had been giving him vibrations at highway speed that 3 different certified technicians had attributed to 3 different causes. He pulled into the lot and saw the Lamborghini. He saw the woman sitting on the doorsill. He saw Ethan standing near her. He walked over and looked at Ethan, the way a person looks at someone they are trying to place from a context that is at first entirely wrong. "Ethan Cole," he said slowly. Ethan nodded. "Dennis." Dennis Farrow looked at the Lamborghini. He looked at the open frunk. He looked at the red toolbox and the auxiliary wire connector and the expression on Victoria Hale's face, which had completed most of its journey from composed to undone and was beginning the slower journey back. "You bypassed the BCM lock with a secondary trigger input," Dennis said. "It was not a question. It's in the frunk harness. Aux, line 7. It'll hold until you get to a dealer." "How did you know it was aux 7? "I wrote the fail-safe protocol," Ethan said. The silence that followed this statement was the kind that happens when a sentence rearranges a room. It was not a dramatic silence. There was no music beneath it, no reaction shot, no theatrical pause performed for an audience. It was simply the silence of a fact occupying space that had previously been filled with incorrect assumptions and needing a moment to settle. Victoria Hale looked at Ethan. She looked at Dennis Farrow, who was looking at Ethan with an expression she recognized immediately because she had worn it herself during acquisitions, the look of someone who has just found something valuable in a place where they did not expect to find it. Then she looked at the frunk. At the auxiliary wire he had run, neat and purposeful, through a connector she had not known existed in a harness she had not known was accessible, in a car she had been driving for 8 months without understanding any of the systems that had been quietly keeping her safe. Systems this man had helped design, in a different life, in a different building, before whatever had happened that he had described only as his situation changing. She felt, for the first time in the afternoon, something other than heat and fear and the residue of embarrassment. She felt the particular vertigo of realizing that the world had been organized differently than you had believed, and had been organized that way for some time, and you were only now receiving the information. "You were at Kessler," Dennis said. 7 years. Left after Ethan paused. A clean, brief pause. "After my situation changed," Dennis nodded. He was the kind of man who understood that situation could mean many things, and that none of them were his business. He looked at the garage. He looked at the sign. He looked at Lily on the workbench, who had stopped pretending to draw and was now watching openly. "The fail-safe protocol you wrote," Dennis said carefully, "is in every Aventador built after 2019, and the SVJ," Ethan said, "and the Huracan Evo, they adapted it." Victoria stood up. She had finished the water. Her face had returned to its usual color, and her voice, when she spoke, had returned to its usual register, which was precise and careful, but there was something different in the precision now. It was less like a tool, and more like an intention. "You knew," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Before I got in the car, you knew the BCM was failing. You knew what would happen." "I knew it was a risk," he said. "I told you. You told me," she said. "Yes." She looked at the ground for a moment, the gravel, the oil stains, the ordinary plainness of the place. "You told me, and I treated you like you had somewhere to be," Ethan said. There was no forgiveness in his voice. There was also no accusation. There was only the flat, accurate summary of what had occurred. "I had somewhere to be," she repeated slowly, as though the sentence were showing her something about itself that she had not previously noticed. Lily had, over the course of the afternoon, completed a drawing. It was executed in the medium of whatever crayons had been accessible: green, orange, brown, and a blue that was worn to a nub. The subject was, as best as could be determined, a yellow car sitting in a lot, with a figure beside it and a smaller figure watching from a doorway. The yellow car had been given a face. It was not a happy face. She climbed down from the workbench and walked across the lot to where Victoria was standing. She held the drawing out. Victoria took it. She looked at it for longer than its dimensions required. "That's me?" she said, pointing to the figure beside the car. "That's the car," Lily said. "That's Ba. That's you inside." She pointed to a small orange shape, visible through what appeared to be the windshield. The orange shape had a red face, which in the logic of the drawing communicated heat. "I made your face red because it was really red." "It was," Victoria agreed. "I was going to draw you mean at the beginning," Lily said. She said this without cruelty, the way a child states an intention that has been modified by subsequent events. but I forgot what mean looks like." Victoria crouched down not elegantly. Her linen blazer was not built for crouching, and looked at the drawing at the level at which it had been produced. "What does it look like?" she said. Lily thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "Like scared," she said finally. "I think mean looks like scared. Just on the outside, instead of the inside." Victoria looked at the drawing. She looked at the orange shape behind the glass with the red face, which was her, which was scared and hot and locked inside a machine that had failed her, and she thought that Lily was possibly the most perceptive person she had spoken to in months. "I should say I'm sorry," Victoria said. She was not talking to Lily. She was looking across the lot at Ethan, who had walked back to the bay and was wiping his hands on the shop rag. "You should say it to Ba," Lily said. "Not to me. I wasn't the one you were mean to." A pause. "Well, you didn't talk to me, so you weren't mean to me. You just didn't see me." "I didn't see you," Victoria said. "People do that," Lily said, without resentment. "It's okay. You can see me now." Victoria stood. She walked to the bay. Ethan was standing at the workbench, the red toolbox open, replacing the auxiliary wire spool to its correct position. He worked with his back half-turned, which was not indifference. It was the posture of someone who has decided not to make a thing easier than it needs to be. "Mr. Cole," she said. He turned. "I owe you an apology." She did not add qualifications. She did not distribute blame across mitigating factors. She did not say I was having a difficult day, or you have to understand my position. She said, "I was rude to you. I dismissed your expertise, and I was condescending about your facility. And then I got in the car against your explicit advice. A beat. You saved my life, and I'd treated you like you were invisible. I'm sorry." Ethan looked at her. He did not say "it's fine" or "no problem," or any of the other phrases available to a person who wants to smooth over a gap that deserves to remain visible for a moment. He said, "Thank you for saying that," and then he turned back to the toolbox. She did not leave immediately. She called the car service and told it she would be delayed. She sat in the bay on a spare stool that Ethan produced from somewhere without comment and drank a second bottle of water and watched him work on the Ford pickup. Dennis Farrow had gone around back with his Porsche, and the sound of him and Ethan talking through a vibration issue drifted occasionally through the bay. Technical, quiet, the register of two people who shared a language that most people never learned. At some point, Lily brought a worn paperback from somewhere and sat beside Victoria on the concrete floor and read. The book was about a rabbit who wanted to understand how airplanes worked. Lily had apparently read it many times and moved through it with the velocity of rereading, which is the velocity of pure enjoyment. "She reads a lot," Victoria said, at a volume intended for Ethan. "She reads everything," he said, without pausing. "Has since she was 4. I can't keep up with her. Does she go to school here?" "Harlan's Creek Elementary." "Yes." Victoria looked at Lily. "She's remarkable," she said, and meant it not the soft, automatic compliment of an adult speaking about a child, but the actual assessment of one intelligence encountering another. "I know," Ethan said. There was no pride in his voice. It was simply an acknowledgement of a known fact. Victoria found this more affecting than pride would have been. She had been sitting in the bay for nearly an hour when the thought arrived. As thoughts of this nature tend to arrive not gradually, but fully formed, as though it had been assembled somewhere off-screen and was presenting itself as a completed object. She said, "The BCM failure." Ethan glanced at her from under the truck. "It failed in a specific way," she said. "Not a wear failure. Not a power surge. The lockout sequence occurred during ignition cycle initialization, which means the failsafe trigger, the one you said you wrote, didn't activate when it should have. Silence. The failsafe is supposed to prevent a full lockout during ignition cycle initialization," she said. "You designed it, so you know why it wouldn't fire." Ethan rolled out from under the truck. He looked at her for a long moment. The look was the one she had been receiving all afternoon, the quality of a person who was deciding not how much to say, but when. He had already decided how much. He had known all of it since the moment the car pulled into the lot. "There's a firmware version," he said. "The dealer update that went out 8 weeks ago. It patched a different vulnerability, and it introduced a condition, a specific sequence, ignition init, with BCM poll pending, that causes the lockout protocol to suppress the failsafe. She went still. How many cars got the update? Every Aventador and Huracan Evo sold since 2019 that's been to an authorized dealer in the last 2 months. The number that Victoria Hale's mind produced in response to this, the number of vehicles, the number of possible incidents, the number of people who might find themselves exactly where she had been 30 minutes ago, in a sealed vehicle in summer heat, with no signal and no exit, arrived in her chest with the weight of something she could not set down. "You've known," she said. "I found it 4 weeks ago. I was doing a diagnostic on a friend's Huracan. Pulled the firmware notes. Ran the sequence simulation." He stood up. "I sent a report to the safety team at Lamborghini's North American office. And I got a response that said my report had been received and would be reviewed within 30 to 45 business days." Victoria stared at him. "I sent a follow-up," he said. Same response. Automated. The July heat moved through the bay in slow waves. Somewhere outside, a cicada had reached a decision about volume. Lily turned a page in her book about the rabbit. "You tried," Victoria said. "Through the correct channels, yes. And then you watched me get in the car. I tried to stop you," he said. "You had somewhere to be." This was the second time he had said that, and the second time it had shown her something about itself. You had somewhere to be, as though the destination had been the deciding factor, as though the having somewhere to be had been the actual event, and the car, the man, the warning, the locked door, all of it, had been the inconvenient context around it. "I have a board meeting," Victoria said. "I know. I'm going to cancel it." He looked at her. "Okay, and I'm going to contact the NHTSA," she said. "And the manufacturer's CEO directly. And my automotive safety attorney." She paused. "And I'm going to CC the original report you sent, with your name as the source. They will take it seriously." Ethan said nothing. "They'll take it seriously," she said again, "because I have resources and access and a platform, and you don't. And that is an obscene fact about how things work. But it's the fact." She looked at the bay floor. "I'm going to use it." It took 3 weeks. Victoria's legal team filed with the NHTSA on a Monday. By Wednesday, the manufacturer had been formally notified. By the following Monday, they had issued a voluntary recall, not of the cars, but of the firmware update, with a patch to follow. The safety bulletin described the failure mode in technical language that was precise and bloodless. It mentioned a previously undocumented interaction between ignition cycle initialization and BCM lockout suppression. It did not mention Ethan Cole. Victoria's office sent a communication to the manufacturer, requesting that the original report, the one Ethan had filed 6 weeks prior, which had been received and would be reviewed within 30 to 45 business days, be formally acknowledged as the initial identification of the fault. The manufacturer's communications team sent back a very pleasant letter expressing their deep commitment to customer safety and their appreciation for the collaborative spirit of independent automotive professionals. Victoria read the letter in her office in Columbus and placed it in a file folder, and called her attorney and told him to begin the process of formal documentation of prior disclosure, and that she would like the timeline preserved with extreme care, and that she intended to follow this wherever it led. On a Thursday evening, she drove back to Harlan's Creek, not in the Lamborghini. The Lamborghini was at the dealer in Columbus, firmware being corrected. The specific sequence that had locked her inside her own vehicle being cauterized from the system. She drove a rental, a dark blue sedan, anonymous, unremarkable, and she parked in the gravel lot in front of the garage with the yellowed sign and the spark plug wind chime. It was evening. The light was the low orange of late summer, which softens everything and makes even graveled lots in small Ohio towns look, briefly, like places worth being. Ethan was in the bay. The Ford was gone. In its place, a Honda Civic with a brake job in progress. He did not seem surprised to see her. "The recall went through," she said. "I saw it. The credit situation isn't resolved," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that." The manufacturer is resistant. My attorney thinks we have a good documentation case. You don't need to do that, he said. I know I don't need to. I'm doing it anyway. She leaned against the bay doorway. The evening air moved through the garage and lifted the edge of an invoice on the workbench. The NHTSA contact told my team that your original report, the one you filed, was the first documentation of this failure mode in their records. When the search went back through their intake system, she paused. It got lost. 30 to 45 business days. Filed and forgotten. He nodded. He had expected this. You could have gone to the press, she said. You could have made a scene. Posted something. Made noise. A pause. You didn't. It wasn't my place, he said. Because you'd tried the right channels first. Because the right channels should work, he said. And when they don't, you find a better lever. You were the better lever. She was quiet for a moment. In the bay, the Honda waited patiently on the lift. The manufacturer's safety team wants to fly you to Stuttgart, she said, to consult on the next generation of the BCM fail-safe architecture. I don't know if that's something you want. He said nothing for a moment. Is Lily's school good? Victoria asked. The question arrived from a direction he had not expected. Yes, he said. Good teachers. Okay, she said. Then it's something to think about. The logistics are solvable. If the rest of it interests you, I'll think about it. September came to Harlan's Creek the way it always did, by cooling the mornings first and leaving the afternoons warm, so that the days existed in a pleasant disagreement with themselves. The sign above the bay door had been repainted, not by a professional, by Ethan, on a Saturday morning when Lily was at a friend's house, with a steadier brush than the one that had produced the previous iteration. The letters were cleaner but still not perfect. This seemed correct. The wind chime clicked. On a Tuesday, 3 weeks into September, a dark blue sedan pulled into the lot. Victoria Hale got out. She was wearing jeans and a shirt and the sunglasses, which were the same ones as before, because certain habits are structural rather than decorative. She did not walk like someone who had somewhere to be. She walked at a pace that was closer to Lily's pace, or the pace of someone learning to have that. Lily was on the bench. She had a new sketch pad, spiral-bound, and she was drawing something that appeared to involve a significant amount of purple crayon. Hi, Lily said, without looking up. Hi, Victoria said. Ethan came out from the back, wiping his hands. He had been working on the Porsche that Dennis Farrow had eventually brought back. The vibration had turned out to be a right rear wheel bearing, which was neither dramatic nor mysterious, but which, resolved, had stopped Dennis from filing an insurance claim, and had produced a brief note of genuine gratitude in an envelope with a Cleveland return address. Victoria stood in the middle of the lot. She looked at the sign. She looked at the wind chime. She looked at Lily, and at the new spiral sketch pad, and at the purple crayon, working its way across the page. I'm not here about the Stuttgart thing, she said. Okay, Ethan said. I'd like to. She paused, in the manner of someone accustomed to finishing sentences immediately, who has decided, for once, to take a breath before the end. I'd like to bring my car in, my other car, a 2022 M3. It's been pulling slightly right at highway speed, and the dealer told me the alignment is fine. I don't think the alignment is fine. Okay, Ethan said. Next week is open Thursday afternoon. Thursday afternoon, she said. She turned to go. Then she stopped, not the pause of hesitation, but the pause of someone who has made a decision and is now executing it with more deliberateness than usual. Mr. Cole, she said. He waited. How do I learn to look at people the way you do? He had been asked variations of this question before by Dennis Farrow, by a few others over the years who had encountered his particular quality of attention and wanted to locate its mechanism, as though it were something that could be transferred by description. He had always deflected, because he was not particularly interested in explaining himself. But he thought about Lily's answer about mean and scared. He thought about the water bottle, and the drawing, and the orange shape behind the glass with the red face. You start by not deciding what something is before you've looked at it, he said. She considered this. That's harder than it sounds. Most things are. She nodded. She walked to her car, the dark blue rental, and got in and drove out of the gravel lot and turned east on the county road toward the interstate. He watched until the car crested the small rise at the edge of town and disappeared. The road was empty after that. The way roads in small Ohio towns are empty in the evenings, not abandoned. Just returned to themselves. Patient and undemonstrative, going nowhere in particular, at a pace that suited them. Ethan watched until the car crested the small rise at the edge of town and disappeared. The road was empty after that. The way roads in small Ohio towns are empty in the evenings, not abandoned. Just returned to themselves. Patient and undemonstrative, going nowhere in particular at a pace that suited them. He went back inside. "Bah," Lily said. "Ma'am, I drew her," Lily said. She held up the sketch pad. The drawing was purple and detailed a figure standing in a lot, face forward, looking at something that was outside the frame of the page. The figure had the sunglasses pushed up on her head and an expression that Lily had captured with the economy available to a 6-year-old who paid attention to everything. It was an expression of someone looking. Not down. Not past. Just looking. Directly, and without the protective distance of assumption, at the thing in front of her. "Can I keep it?" Ethan asked. Lily considered this with appropriate seriousness. "Yes," she said. "But don't hang it by the wind chime. It'll fade." He took it carefully. He looked at it for a moment. And then he set it on the workbench. Waited at the corner by a spark plug socket, where the afternoon light came in at an angle that would not, for the present hour at least, reach it. He stood and looked at it for another moment. The figure in the drawing. The fact of looking directly, without the scaffolding of rank or certainty, or the protective fiction that the world divides neatly into those worth attending to, and those who are not. He had built a life in this garage on a simple proposition, that the work in front of you deserved your full attention, and the person who brought it to you deserved the same. He had not always had the vocabulary for this. He had learned most of it from Lily, who had been teaching him since she was 3, and most of what she had taught him she had not known she was teaching. He thought about Stuttgart. He thought about the long flight, and the conference rooms, and the clean industrial smell of a facility where things were designed rather than repaired. He thought about Lily's school, which was good, genuinely good, with teachers who understood that she was learning things faster than they could present them, and who had decided to regard this as a pleasure rather than an inconvenience. He had not decided anything about Stuttgart. He did not need to decide today. The wind chime clicked. The cicadas held their opinions. In Bay 1, the Honda Civic waited, brakes half finished, the job ongoing, the afternoon still long, and full of its own particular kind of work. The fluorescent light above Bay 7 flickered every 40 seconds. Ethan Cole had counted. He'd been counting it for 11 months every morning when he arrived at 6:45, before the rest of the crew clocked in, and every evening when he stayed past 7 to finish whatever the junior techs had left half done. The flicker had become a kind of metronome for his life at Hale Motorsport Engineering. Predictable, unnoticed, slightly broken. The physical fact of the shop was something he had made his peace with. Some shops were beautiful, climate-controlled, custom-lit. The kind of facility where the environment itself communicated the seriousness of the work. This was not that kind of shop, or not entirely. The executive and prototype areas were pristine. Bay 7 was old infrastructure, running on old infrastructure budget, and the fluorescent fixture above it had been on the maintenance request queue since the 3rd week of his employment and had never made it to the top. He'd considered fixing it himself, which technically fell outside his job description, and had decided against it on the theory that fixing things outside your job description was how you ended up with more things outside your job description and no acknowledgement for any of it. The bay smelled the way all serious garages smell, not the romantic scent of motor oil and ambition that automotive magazines like to describe, but the real thing: burnt rubber, hydraulic fluid, something metallic and faintly sweet beneath it all, like copper warming in the sun. Ethan moved through it the way a man moves through his own house in the dark. He didn't need to look where his hands went. Cole. That was Derek Marsh, 26 years old, 3 months out of MIT, currently holding a diagnostic tablet like it was a sacred object. The torque calibration on Bay 3's off by like 2 units. Can you run the recalibration sequence? We're behind on the morning report. Ethan set down his socket wrench. He looked at Derek for a moment, not with hostility, just with the particular patience of a man who has learned that some conversations cost more energy than they're worth. 2 units won't affect the baseline, he said. But if it bothers you, the recalibration sequence is in the manual. Page 212. Derek looked at him like he'd suggested solving the problem with a dowsing rod. I don't have time to— Neither do I, Ethan said, and picked up his wrench again. Derek left. The light flickered. The car in Bay 7 was a 2023 HME7, the production model that the racing division used for regional circuits. It was not, by any stretch, the most sophisticated machine in the building. That honor belonged to the prototype 2 floors up, behind a keycard door that Ethan's credentials didn't open. But the HME7 had a valve timing problem that 3 different techs had failed to diagnose over the past 2 weeks, and this morning Ethan had been assigned to it with the specific instruction from shop foreman Greg Halliday to just make it drivable. Don't overthink it. Ethan didn't overthink it. He listened to it. That was the thing nobody in the shop understood about him, or rather, it was the thing they understood just enough to dismiss. The younger techs worked from readouts and software alerts. They were good at it. They understood the data, but Ethan worked from something older and harder to name. The sound a gasket makes when it's beginning to fail but hasn't failed yet, the almost imperceptible vibration in a driveshaft that's a 1/4 millimeter out of true, the way an engine breathes differently at altitude versus sea level, when the intake manifold has been rebuilt one too many times. He pressed 2 fingers against the valve cover. Let the engine idle. Waited. There a hesitation in the rhythm, not mechanical, not electrical. Thermal. The coolant jacket on the 3rd cylinder was restricting flow at operating temperature, causing microsecond deviations in the combustion cycle that the diagnostic software wasn't calibrated to catch, because the software had been written for normal operating conditions, and this engine had spent 6 of its 11 months running at track conditions, which were not normal. He spent 22 minutes making 3 adjustments, none of which involved the parts that the previous 3 techs had replaced. The engine smoothed out. The rhythm became what it was supposed to be. He documented the repair in the log with the same sparse language. He always used no flourish, no explanation of his reasoning, just what he'd found and what he'd done. Then he moved to the next bay. Lily was 6 years old and had the specific, devastating habit of asking questions that had no comfortable answer. "Did you fix the car?" she asked that evening. Sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book she wasn't really using. "Yes," Ethan said from the stove, where he was making the pasta with the jarred tomato sauce she liked and he pretended to like. "Did they say thank you?" He didn't answer immediately. The pasta water was starting to bubble. "They didn't really notice," he said. Lily considered this with the solemn thoroughness of a 6-year-old philosopher. "That doesn't seem fair," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." She went back to her coloring book, or the pretense of it. After a moment she said, without looking up, "Mrs. Patterson noticed when I fixed the pencil sharpener." "Did she?" "She said thank you 3 times. I counted." Ethan smiled at the pasta water. 3 times is a lot. "I know." Lily selected a purple crayon. "You should work somewhere. They say it at least twice." He didn't tell her that places like that were harder to find than she imagined. He didn't tell her about the stack of bills on his nightstand, or the outstanding balance at Riley Memorial from when she'd had her appendix out 14 months ago, or the way the math of their life added up to, you take what you can get, and you do it without complaint. He just served the pasta and sat across from her at the small kitchen table, and they ate, and she told him about a bird she'd seen in the schoolyard that she was sure was a species that didn't normally live in the region, and he listened like it was the most important story he'd ever heard. Because it was. The prototype lived in Bay 12. Ethan knew this, the way he knew most things at HME, by attention, by inference, by listening to conversations that weren't directed at him. The engineering team called it the Raptor internally. It was the successor to the HME 7 line, built around a new modular architecture that would allow the company to compete at a tier they hadn't reached in the 7 years since Victoria Hale had taken over from her father and restructured the division from a boutique and manufacturer into something with real competitive ambitions. He had no business being near it. He also had no ability to stop himself from pausing beside the keycard door whenever his route took him past it, feeling the faint vibration of machinery through the wall, reading what he could from what he heard. The Friday morning, everything changed. Ethan was delivering a parts manifest to the engineering office adjacent to Bay 12 when the door opened and two of the lead engineers, Carolyn Briggs and a younger man named Spencer Walsh, came out with their faces arranged in the particular expression of people who have just spent 4 hours arguing about a problem they cannot solve. If it's not the fuel mapping, then what? Spencer was saying. I don't know, Carolyn said. The mapping's fine. The simulation shows the mapping is fine. The simulation also showed the cooling system was fine. And we had 2 thermal shutdowns last week. They went past Ethan without seeing him. He stood in the corridor for a moment, holding the parts manifest. He could hear, beneath their conversation, the particular unresolved quality of engineers who have been circling a problem long enough that they've started to distrust their own instruments. He recognized it because he'd felt it himself, years ago, before he'd learned that the distrust was sometimes correct and the instruments were the problem. Then, before he'd made a conscious decision, he was pushing through the door. Bay 12 was twice the size of the regular bays. It smelled differently cleaner, more controlled, the environmental systems keeping temperature and humidity within tight tolerances. The Raptor sat in the center under a battery of professional lighting, its carbon fiber body still partly unpaneled. The engine exposed, like an anatomical drawing. Ethan walked toward it. He wasn't running through a checklist. He wasn't consulting a diagnostic protocol. He was simply looking at a thing he understood, the way a musician understands an instrument, not just functionally but structurally, at the level of principle, at the level of why. The fuel injection rail had been assembled with the secondary return line inverted. It was subtle. The line was technically connected and technically sealed. It would pass a leak test. It would pass a pressure test. But under sustained high RPM operation, the flow dynamics would create a pressure pocket that would introduce air microbubbles into the fuel stream, and those microbubbles would cause irregular combustion that would manifest as power loss at exactly the moments when maximum power was required. Exit from slow corners, sustained acceleration on the main straight. It was the kind of mistake that happened when someone who understood the components perfectly assembled them, without fully understanding how they interacted under race conditions. Ethan reached in and began to address it. He was working on the secondary clamp when he heard footsteps, precise, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that had learned to sound like authority, and then a voice that he associated immediately with someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "What are you doing in here?" He didn't straighten up immediately. He finished seating the clamp before he turned around. Because if you stop in the middle of something like that, you can create a worse problem than you started with. Victoria Hale was 38 years old and had the particular quality of someone whose composure had been assembled so carefully, for so long, that it had become structural rather than performed. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her expression gave nothing away. She was looking at him the way you look at something that shouldn't be where it is. "The secondary return line on the injection rail is inverted," Ethan said. "I was correcting it. You don't have clearance to be in this bay." "No," he agreed. "What's your name?" "Ethan Cole." "I'm in general maintenance, Bay 7. She looked at him with the kind of assessment that takes in a person's clothing, posture, tools, and apparent station simultaneously without appearing to. Then she looked at the engine. "Step away from the car," she said. He stepped away. "Carolyn." She said it without raising her voice. And somehow Carolyn Briggs appeared within 30 seconds. "Have this area reset and have someone walk Mr. Cole out. And find out how he got past the key card." "The door didn't latch completely," Ethan said. "It's been doing that." "I can fix that too, if you want." Victoria Hale looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not softening. Exactly. But a recalibration. "Don't touch anything else," she said. "Either of you, Have someone look at what he did to that rail before we run the car." Then she was gone, and Ethan was escorted, very politely, back to Bay 7. The test run was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ethan knew because the whole facility knew it was the kind of event that filtered through a place, creating a different quality of attention in the people who worked there. The engineering team arrived earlier than usual. The prototype bay was active by 6 in the morning. There was a journalist from Motorsport Engineering Quarterly being given a very careful tour of the non-sensitive areas by someone from communications. Ethan was in Bay 4, replacing a brake line on a regional circuit car, when Greg Halliday appeared beside him. "Cole, whatever you did to that rail on the prototype, they put it back to how it was." He said it without inflection, reporting a fact. Ethan set down his tool. "They put it back." Spencer Walsh said the original configuration was correct per the design spec. "They thought you'd messed with it." He thought about that for a moment. The design spec. He thought about who had written the design spec and what they had understood when they wrote it, and what they had not understood, the thing that happens between theory and practice, between a drawing and a machine that runs at 9,000 revolutions per minute under race conditions for 90 minutes. "When are they running the car?" he asked. "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. Tell them it'll fail," Ethan said. "Not immediately. Somewhere in the second session. Power will drop at high RPM. First it'll feel like a tuning issue. Then the bubbles will reach critical density, and the engine will shut down." Halliday looked at him for a long time. Greg Halliday was 51 years old and had been in motorsport manufacturing for 23 years. And he was not, by any measure, a stupid man. He had noticed things about Ethan Cole over 11 months that he had not spoken about. Because there are things you sense in this industry without being able to explain them, and you don't say those things out loud until you understand them better. "I'll pass it up," Halliday said. "Can't promise anything." "I know," Ethan said. He passed it up. Victoria Hale received the warning, filed it under the category of maintenance staff overstepping, and proceeded with the test. The Raptor ran beautifully for 40 minutes. Ethan could hear it from Bay 4, or rather, he could hear the facility's reaction to it. The particular quality of silence that settles over a crowd watching something work the way it's supposed to. He kept working. He replaced the brake line. He started on the oil service for an HME6 that was due for its quarterly maintenance. At 3:22 p.m., he heard the sound change. It was faint from where he was. The engine note developed an irregularity, barely perceptible, that another person would have attributed to track conditions or driver input. Ethan knew what it was. He set down his wrench and waited. At 3:31 p.m., the Raptor's engine cut out completely at the far end of the test track. The silence that followed was a different quality from the silence before. Ethan picked up his wrench and went back to the oil service. The meeting was in the conference room, adjacent to the executive level, which Ethan had never been in. He sat across from Victoria Hale and Spencer Walsh, and a man from legal named Renner whose first name he wasn't given, and he understood within the first 90 seconds that the conclusion had already been decided. "The diagnostic team has determined that the fuel injection rail was interfered with prior to this afternoon's test," Spencer said. He was precise about his language, which Ethan noticed. Interfered with, not modified or adjusted. Interfered with. "I corrected an assembly error," Ethan said. "The configuration you altered was consistent with the design specification. The design specification doesn't account for pressure dynamics under sustained high RPM race conditions. That's not something you'd be in a position to evaluate." There was a silence. Victoria Hale was watching him with the same expression she'd had in the bay, not hostile, exactly, but fundamentally closed, like a door that had been shut and was not going to open. "Your access to Bay 12 was unauthorized," the legal man said, "and the outcome of this afternoon's test is directly attributable to the modification you made to the vehicle. We're terminating your employment, effective immediately." Ethan looked at Victoria Hale. She didn't look away, but she didn't say anything either. "The engine failed because the return line was put back to its incorrect configuration," he said. He wasn't arguing. He was simply putting the fact into the room, because the fact existed regardless of whether anyone in the room wanted it there. I told Greg Halliday it would fail. He passed it up. That's documented. That's all, the legal man said. Ethan stood. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He looked at the room one more time, the clean conference table, the framed photographs of winning cars on the walls, the particular quality of light that expensive buildings have, the secondary return line, he said. On the Raptor. When you rebuild, don't route it the way the spec shows. The spec is wrong. Then he left. The drive back was 22 minutes, and he spent it not thinking about Hale Motorsport Engineering. He thought about whether the grocery store would still be open, because they were low on the cereal Lily ate for breakfast. He thought about the insurance paperwork on the nightstand that he'd been putting off, because the premium increase notice required a call to a number, with hold times measured in geological epochs. He thought about the small backyard, and whether the weather would hold through the weekend, because Lily had been asking to plant something tomatoes. She'd decided, because her teacher had a tomato plant, and it seemed to Lily like a profound and reasonable ambition. The grocery store was still open. He bought the cereal. He bought tomato seedlings from the small rack near the entrance. 3 of them in little plastic pots, because the weekend was going to be fine. Lily was at the neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Fontaine, 74 years old, who babysat for $40 a day and pretended she was doing Ethan a favor, when in fact she found Lily's company genuinely preferable to most adult conversation, a judgment that Ethan entirely understood. He collected her. She was wearing a crown she'd made from Mrs. Fontaine's aluminum foil. "How was your day?" she asked, in the exact tone and cadence she'd heard him use with her every evening, which she had decided was the correct greeting. "Different," he said. "Different good or different bad?" He considered this, buckling her into the car seat. "Just different. I don't have my job anymore." She looked at him with the particular seriousness of a child who understands that some sentences require full attention. "Did they fire you?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you do something wrong?" He started the car. He thought about the question with the respect it deserved, because she was asking it sincerely, not as comfort-seeking but as genuine inquiry. She wanted to know. "I told them something true that they didn't want to hear," he said. "And I went somewhere I wasn't supposed to go to fix something that needed fixing. So it's complicated. Being right is different from being allowed," she said. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Where did you hear that?" "I made it up just now." She looked out the window. "Is it true?" "Yeah," he said. "It is. That's not fair." "No. But it's real." She thought about this for the rest of the drive. And when they got home, she helped him carry the tomato seedlings inside. And they ate dinner, and she didn't ask any more questions about it, which was its own kind of grace. The report landed on Victoria Hale's desk at 8:14 a.m. the following Monday. She'd asked for it Friday, a full technical analysis of the Raptor's failure, independent of the engineering team's initial assessment, conducted by an outside consultant they used for precisely these situations. She read it twice. The failure had originated in the fuel injection rail. Specifically, in the inverted secondary return line and its interaction with the high-pressure fuel system under sustained high RPM conditions. The configuration that the engineering team had restored, the configuration consistent with the design specification, had been the proximate cause of the failure. The modification that Ethan Cole had made would have prevented it. She set down the report. She picked it up again. She went to page 7, where the consultant had included a technical note. "The corrective adjustment is not one that would typically be identified by standard diagnostic software or post-assembly inspection protocols. It requires familiarity with the interaction dynamics of this specific fuel management architecture under race-condition thermal loads. This level of knowledge is not common." Victoria Hale had a gift, which was the ability to hold 2 contradictory things in her mind simultaneously, without immediately resolving the tension between them. She had fired a man for causing a failure. The technical evidence indicated he had, in fact, tried to prevent it. She walked to the window. The test track was visible from here. Empty. In the early morning, She went back to her desk and pulled up Cole's HR file. Hired 11 months ago, through a contractor. No formal credentials on file. The contractor had processed the background check, and she realized now she'd never looked at what that check contained. Standard maintenance role. 2 positive informal reviews from Halliday. No incidents prior to the Bay 12 entry. She called Halliday. "The report's sitting with you," he said, before she could frame the question. "Yes. I told you he said it would fail," Halliday said. "I put it in the system. The timestamp's there. I know." A pause. "Greg. In 11 months. What did you notice about him?" Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that contained things a man had been thinking for a long time, without saying. "He fixes things in ways I've never seen," Halliday said. "Not textbook, not diagnostic software ways. He knows what's wrong before he opens the car. And the other day, before the thing with the prototype, Carolyn Briggs came down to Bay 7 to ask me about a cooling issue on the HME6 series, a problem the engineering team had been chasing for 3 months. Ethan was across the floor with his back to us. He said, without turning around, "Check the seals on the intercooler housing. 3rd unit from the left in the series." Just like that. Carolyn went and checked. It was exactly right. Victoria didn't say anything. "I've been in this industry a long time," Halliday said. "The way he understands these cars, it's not maintenance-level knowledge. It's not even senior engineer-level knowledge. It's something different. It's like he knows why they work, not just how." After she hung up, Victoria sat at her desk for a long time. Then she went to the archive. The archive occupied a server room and 2 filing cabinets that nobody had touched in years. HME's engineering documentation went back to the company's founding, and her father had insisted on maintaining physical copies of everything, a habit she'd privately considered archaic and had never gotten around to ending. The Raptor's architecture, the fuel management system, the modular suspension geometry, the thermal management approach traced its lineage to a design framework developed internally in the early years of her tenure. She'd always understood this as the work of the engineering team she'd inherited and expanded. She'd always understood the intellectual history of the company's technology, the way you understand things that happened before you were paying close enough attention. The document she found was labeled HME Advanced Propulsion Architecture V, 1 Conceptual Framework and Design Principles. The date was 7 years ago. The author field read, E. Cole, Chief Propulsion Engineer, Consulting. She read for an hour. The framework was she had enough technical knowledge to understand this, even if the depth of the engineering was beyond her foundational. Not just prescient, but generative. The principles it laid out had shaped every significant engineering decision the company had made since, often without anyone consciously tracing the lineage. The cooling management approach on the HME6 series, the modular geometry of the suspension system that had become their competitive differentiator, the fuel management architecture that was, right now, at the heart of the Raptor's design. All of it traced back to this document. To a man who had apparently worked with HME for 2 years as a consulting engineer, 7 years ago, and then she checked, had simply stopped. No formal departure documentation, no legal dispute, no forwarding arrangement. He had been there, and then he had not been there, and in the intervening years, the company had built an entire competitive identity on the foundation he had left behind, without apparently anyone noticing that they'd lost the man who understood it at its deepest level. She looked at the name again, E. Cole. She thought about a man in a maintenance uniform pressing 2 fingers against a valve cover and waiting. She thought about a man who had gone into a restricted bay not to sabotage a car but to fix it, and had then been fired for the failure that resulted from undoing his fix. She thought about what Halliday had said. It's like he knows why they work, not just how. She closed the document. She opened her calendar. She looked at the next 3 weeks. 2 investor calls, a regional race circuit with the HME7 fleet, a launch event for the Raptor's public debut that was now very much in question. She thought about what it meant to have been wrong. Not mistaken wrong. There was a difference, and she'd learned it expensively enough to take it seriously. She picked up her phone. The HME-7S started failing on Wednesday. Not catastrophically, these were production vehicles, not prototypes, and the failures were the kind that accumulated rather than exploded. A power loss under load that 3 different crew chiefs reported independently. A thermal irregularity in the cooling system that matched the pattern Carolyn Briggs had been chasing for 3 months. 2 engines developing the same irregular combustion signature at different venues, diagnosed differently by the teams on the ground because nobody had connected them to look at the pattern. Spencer Walsh convened the engineering team. They ran analysis. They made adjustments. The adjustments helped for 1 session, and then the problem returned. On Thursday, one of the regional teams reported that their car had lost 15% of its power output during the final practice session without any corresponding alert from the monitoring system. The car had still finished. The driver had managed it. But the data, when Carolyn pulled it, showed the same combustion irregularity, that slight, almost imperceptible stutter in the cycle that had preceded the Raptor's failure. She brought it to Spencer. Spencer brought it to the engineering team. The engineering team built a hypothesis, tested the hypothesis, found that it partially explained the symptom, adjusted the hypothesis, and tested it again. By Thursday evening, they had a patch that stabilized the vehicle in simulation. The patch didn't hold in practice. On Friday, Victoria sat in on the debrief. She listened to Spencer and Carolyn and the 3 junior engineers cycle through possibilities. Fuel mixture, track conditions, batch variation in the components, and she watched them apply their considerable intelligence to a problem that kept slipping out from under their explanations. After an hour, she said, "The Edelkielk for 6 intercooler seal issue that Halliday mentioned. The one Cole identified. What was the underlying cause?" Carolyn looked at her. A thermal expansion mismatch between the seal material and the housing under extended operation. It would have required modeling the long-term thermal cycle to predict not something a standard diagnostic would catch. And the HME-7S, the pattern we're seeing now, could it be related? A silence. The kind of silence that means several people are privately recognizing something they'd been close to, but hadn't quite reached. The HME-7 cooling system is based on the same architecture as the HME-6, Carolyn said slowly. If there's a systematic issue in how that architecture performs under sustained race conditions, then we've been treating symptoms, Spencer said. He sounded like a man who has found a thorn that's been in his foot for 3 months. We've been patching individual vehicles when there's something wrong at the architecture level. Yes, Victoria said. Nobody said it, but she could see them all reaching the same conclusion she'd reached 3 days ago. The person who understood the architecture at the level required to find and fix this was not in the room. The person who understood it at that level had been escorted from the building 11 days ago. She tried applying what she'd read in the design framework document. She had her engineers try it. They made progress, real progress, not cosmetic, and the progress confirmed her understanding of the gap. They were working from the document. Cole had written the document. Between those 2 things was the difference between reading music and hearing it. She couldn't close that gap with a consultant. She couldn't close it with more analysis. She couldn't close it by spending the weekend in the archive. The investor call was on Thursday at 9. Martin Forsyth represented a consortium that held 22% of HME's equity. He was 60 years old, had made 3 fortunes, and communicated with an efficiency that could be mistaken for warmth if you weren't paying attention. "The Raptor launch is in 5 weeks, he said. "Walk me through where we are." Victoria walked him through it. She was precise about what she knew and what she didn't, which was one of the things that had earned his confidence over the years. She didn't obscure or minimize, and she paid for that honesty occasionally with very uncomfortable conversations. This was one of them. "The vehicle isn't ready," she said. "Not for the standards we've committed to. We have a systemic issue in the architecture that we're actively addressing. But my current team doesn't have the depth to close it before the launch date." A pause. The specific, expensive pause of a man calculating. How long to close it? If I have the right person working on it? 4 weeks, maybe less. Without that person? I don't know. Longer than we have. Who's the right person? She told him. Another pause. The man you fired? Yes. That's a problem. I know. Victoria. His voice carried the particular register of someone who needs you to understand that what they're about to say is not a preference but a condition. The institutional investors have a presentation scheduled around this launch. 3 major sponsorship commitments are contingent on the Raptors' public debut performance. If we push the launch, we don't just delay revenue, we have cancellation clauses to deal with, and we have a story problem. The story becomes, HME can't deliver. Once that story exists, it's very hard to replace with a different one. I understand. Fix it, he said, and hung up. She found his address in the HR file. She drove herself. Not with a driver, not with someone from legal, not with anyone who might transform the visit into something transactional, before she'd had a chance to figure out what it actually was. She drove herself in her own car, which she rarely did, and she turned off the navigation after the first few minutes because she needed the cognitive space that driving without assistance provides. The house was in a neighborhood she'd driven through but never stopped in. Single story. Older. With a front yard that had been planted recently, she could see the freshly turned soil and the small wire cages of what looked like tomato seedlings. The car in the driveway was a 2014 pickup that had been maintained with evident care. She sat in her car for a moment. She was aware that she was about to do something she'd never done before. Arrive at a former employee's house without the armor of institutional process. No legal framework, no HR representative, no prepared statement. Just herself and whatever she actually thought. She got out and knocked. The door was opened by a 6-year-old girl in what appeared to be a homemade crown. They looked at each other. Hi, the girl said. Hello, Victoria said. Is your father home? He's in the back. Are you a friend? Victoria considered how to answer this accurately. I'm someone who needs to speak with him, she said. Is that okay? The girl examined her with the unsettling directness of young children. You can come in, she decided. Victoria took her shoes off. She was shown to the kitchen, where a single-place setting remained on the table from what appeared to have been lunch. Through the back window, she could see Ethan Cole in the small backyard, crouched beside the tomato plants, doing something deliberate with his hands. The girl went to the back door and said, with great confidence, Dad. Someone here. She took her shoes off. He stood. He turned. He looked through the glass door at Victoria Hale for a long moment before he came inside. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. There was no deferential shift in his posture, no straightening. No adjustment to accommodate her presence the way people usually adjusted. He just looked at her. This is a business call, she said. I'd like to be clear about that. All right, he said. I need you to come back. He said nothing. The Raptor has systemic issues that trace to the foundational architecture. My team has the diagnostic reports and the framework documents, but they don't have the depth to solve it before the launch. You do. You read the archive documents, he said. Yes. How long did it take you to find them? A beat. 11 days. Something moved in his expression, not satisfaction, not bitterness. Something more complicated. You fired me for fixing the same problem you're now asking me to fix. I know. You didn't say I'm sorry. Not yet, she said. I'm not sure I've earned it yet. I'm telling you what I should have noticed. What I didn't notice. And what I'm asking for. What I owe you for the time, and what I owe you for the mistake. I'd like to work that out separately, if you're willing. He looked at her for a long time. The 6-year-old had reappeared in the doorway and was watching the conversation with the careful attention of someone taking notes. This is Lily, he said. I know, Victoria said. She has good security instincts. Lily, who had been clearly taking this as a compliment from the moment it was said, stood up slightly straighter. If I come back, Ethan said, it's not to fix one car. It's to fix the architecture. Whatever else needs to change in how the documentation is maintained and attributed, that happens too. I'm not going back to be a resource that gets used and filed incorrectly again. That's fair, Victoria said. Lily has a medical bill from 14 months ago. Still outstanding. Victoria didn't break eye contact. I'll take care of it. "It's not a condition," he said. "I'll take care of it eventually." But it's context. It's part of what 11 months in that shop looked like. The room was quiet. Through the back window, the tomato seedlings moved slightly in the afternoon breeze. "I'll come back for the car," he said at last. "Not for the company, not for you, because the car is a good problem, and there are people at HME whose jobs depend on it running right. That's the reason." "I'll take it," Victoria said. He didn't come back with ceremony. He came back the way he'd always come, early, before most of the staff arrived, in the same clothes. Halliday met him at the entrance and gave him a keycard without saying much, and that was the extent of the welcome. He worked methodically. He spent the first 3 days doing nothing but examining every component in the fuel management system, the cooling circuits, the suspension geometry, not fixing, just understanding the gap between the architecture as designed and the architecture as built. 7 years of incremental decisions, each rational in isolation, had collectively drifted the implementation away from its foundational intent, the way a river slowly shifts course. No single moment of change, but an aggregate divergence that only becomes visible from a sufficient distance. He documented each deviation. He didn't do this for the record. Or not only for the record, he did it because understanding the shape of the drift was the only way to understand what needed to be corrected, and in what order. Some of the deviations were harmless. Some were the source of problems the engineering team had been chasing for months without recognizing their common origin. On the 4th day, he started making changes. Bay 12 was given to him entirely. The engineering team, Carolyn, Spencer, and the 3 junior engineers were told they were supporting, not directing. This was a difficult instruction, and they received it with varying degrees of grace. Spencer Walsh, to his credit, received it the best. He sat down with Ethan on the first morning and said, "I'd like to understand what I got wrong. Not as a criticism, as an engineer," Ethan told him. He was precise and patient, and entirely without condescension, which surprised Spencer more than anything else. "The spec assumed steady-state conditions," Spencer said, working through it. "The spec was written for a test environment. The car doesn't live in a test environment. The thermal model didn't account for. The thermal model is good, but it's a model. The car is a thing. The thing behaves according to physics that the model approximated. The approximation was close enough to be useful, and not close enough to be right." Spencer was quiet for a moment. "How do you see it? When you look at the engine, what do you actually see?" Ethan thought about how to answer this accurately. "I see the forces that are operating," he said. "Not the parts. The forces. The parts are just the physical argument the engineers made about how to manage those forces. When the argument is wrong, the forces find another way." Spencer Walsh wrote this down, not because it was a technical instruction, but because it was the most useful thing anyone had said to him in 3 years of trying to understand why some problems yielded to the textbook and some didn't. Ethan worked for 19 days. He didn't make declarations or hold briefings. He made changes to the Raptor small, precise, each one documented with a level of specificity that Carolyn found almost overwhelming, and he concurrently developed a revised version of the foundational architecture document that addressed the gap between the original Soption's framework's design intent and the implementation that had accumulated over 7 years of engineers interpreting it at second hand. Victoria came by Bay 12 3 times. She didn't interfere. She looked at the car and at the documentation and at the particular quality of attention Ethan brought to both. Once, late on a Wednesday evening when most of the floor had cleared out, she stood beside him while he was examining a torque specification, and she said, without quite meaning to say it out loud, "Why did you leave?" 7 years ago. He didn't look up immediately. "My wife died. I left." She absorbed this without comment, which was the correct response. "I didn't want to build race cars anymore," he said. "I wanted to do something with my hands. Something where the result of the work was clear and immediate, where I fixed one thing at a time, and that thing stayed fixed. And now?" He looked at the car. "This is a good problem," he said. "It's worth solving." On the evening of the 19th day, Ethan stepped back from the Raptor and said, to nobody in particular, "It's ready." Carolyn ran the diagnostic. Every parameter was within tolerance. Not just within tolerance, settled into it, like a lock finding its combination. "Run it," Ethan said. They ran it. The regional circuit event was held on a Saturday in September. Not the Raptors' formal public launch that was still 2 weeks away, but a competitive event where HME had entered 2 vehicles and where performance would be observed by the people whose opinions formed the unofficial record that preceded any official announcement. Ethan was there, not visibly. He was in the technical compound, which was a fenced area with a catering tent and an equipment bay, and he was wearing the same HME maintenance uniform he'd always worn because nobody had offered him a different one, and he hadn't asked. He drank coffee from a paper cup and watched the telemetry on a laptop that Carolyn had set up and mostly left alone. The Raptor ran in the second session. He watched the data come in. Fuel pressure, thermal management, combustion signature, all of it tracking the way it should track. The forces in the machine making the argument he'd designed them to make. He watched the car hold pace through the long corners and come alive on the main straight. The power delivery clean and sustained. Nothing fighting nothing. He drank his coffee. The post-event press briefing was held in a room with a lot of glass and cameras and sponsors' logos. Victoria Hale stood at the podium and said what needed to be said about the Raptors' performance and HME's engineering program. Then she said something that wasn't on the prepared remarks. "I want to acknowledge a debt," she said. "The engineering foundation that makes this vehicle possible, and every competitive vehicle this company has built in the past 7 years, was developed by a man named Ethan Cole. He was our chief propulsion engineer, consulting, 7 years ago. He returned recently to help us close a gap in our technical program. He should have been recognized throughout, and he wasn't. That's a failure of institutional attention, and it's mine specifically. I want to say that publicly." In the technical compound, Ethan heard this through the audio feed on the laptop. He didn't react visibly. He finished his coffee. He closed the telemetry window and opened the revised architecture document, which he'd been proofing one final time. Later, after the teams had packed down and the sponsors had moved to the hospitality area and the journalists were filing their pieces, Victoria found him in the equipment bay. "You didn't come inside," she said. "No. Did you hear what I said?" "Yes." She stood in the doorway. She had the look of someone who has been composing a sentence for several days and is now uncertain whether it's the right sentence. "I'd like you to stay," she said. "Not in maintenance. Not in any capacity you've been in before. I want to restructure the chief engineer role to include what you actually do, which is work at the level of first principles. There'd be a team answerable to you. Budget. Attribution, going forward." Ethan put the laptop in its case. "I'm going to say no to most of that," he said. She waited. "The attribution, yes. The documentation going forward, yes. If someone builds on the architecture, they know where it comes from." He paused. "Lily's insurance. I meant what I said, that it's not a condition, but I'd like it included in whatever the conversation about compensation looks like." "Already done," Victoria said. "And one other thing." "All right. Nobody gets fired for fixing a problem," he said. "Whatever their title is. Whatever bay they're supposed to be in. If someone in this company identifies a real problem and tries to address it, the response is to look at the problem, not to escort them out." She held his gaze. "That's a policy change." "Yes," he said. "It is." She nodded. Once, definitively. The way she nodded when something was decided. "Then we have an agreement," she said. Sunday afternoon. The light in the kitchen was the particular gold of early September, long and angled, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look more like themselves. Lily was at the kitchen table with a library book about bird migration, which she was reading with the intensity of someone following a detective story. The tomato plants on the back porch had, against modest odds, produced actual tomatoes, 5 of them, all now sitting on the kitchen counter in a row, deeply red and slightly imperfect, which Lily had declared superior to the ones at the grocery store. "Dad," she said, without looking up from the book. "Yeah. Do you have a new job now?" He was at the counter, washing the tomatoes. "Kind of. The same place?" "Yes." She turned a page. Are they going to say thank you this time? He thought about Victoria Hale at the podium, saying words into cameras that had gone into whatever record things go into now. He thought about Spencer Walsh writing something in a notebook. He thought about Carolyn Briggs running the diagnostic and the particular look on her face when the numbers settled. They did, actually, he said. Lily looked up. How many times? Once, but it was public. She considered this with the rigorous fairness she brought to all assessments. Public is worth more, she decided. So it might count as 2. That's a reasonable analysis, he said. She went back to her book. Outside, through the back door, the tomato plants moved in the breeze, the wire cages doing their small work of holding things up. On the counter, the television was playing something in the background that neither of them was watching. A broadcast recap of the day's motorsport events, footage of cars on a track. A voice naming positions and times. The specific anonymous beauty of machines doing exactly what they were built to do. Ethan dried a tomato with a kitchen towel. He held it in his hand for a moment, warm from the sun, slightly imperfect, improbably real, and then set it back in the row. He didn't look at the television. He had already seen enough to know the car was right. That had always been the whole of what he wanted. Not credit, not titles, not the validation of a room full of people saying his name, just the thing working the way it was supposed to work. The forces balanced, the argument correct, the machine made honest. He'd built his whole life on that principle. Through the years when it had been recognized and through the years when it hadn't, through the grief and the small kitchen and the tomato plants that had, against all probability, produced actual tomatoes. The work was the same in all of those contexts. The satisfaction of it was the same. He set the tomato down and looked at his hands. Lily, from across the table, said, "Dad, did you know that some birds fly 10,000 miles without stopping?" "I didn't know that," he said. "It's in the book." She turned the page. They just know where they're going. Even the first time. Even when they've never done it before. She looked up at him with the expression she wore when she was offering something she considered important. "Do you think that's what it's like? Knowing something without being taught?" He thought about a fuel injection rail, and a design framework written 7 years ago, and a light that flickered every 40 seconds in Bay 7, and a car that had finally, after everything, run exactly right. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's exactly what it's like." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her book. Outside, in the small backyard, the tomato plants held their ground against the September breeze. The wire cages doing their patient, anonymous work of holding things up toward the light.